Okay, then. It looks like we're recording, which is good. Hello, and welcome to question and answer number 191. I'm your host, Patimokkha, and it is that time of day on a Sunday afternoon when the light is coming through the blinds just right so that I've got these horizontal bars of light across my face. Do not worry, it's not anything paranormal. This is my beverage. I haven't already said that. You know, just the flurry of just starting a new Q&A sometimes can result in confused mindfulness. And 191 is a prime number, as far as I can tell. So we're in the prime of our lives at this moment. And let's see, anything else I got to say by way of introduction before wading into this? We might be interrupted a little bit. I might be distracted during the course of this Q&A because my woman is expecting company. So, with that as an excuse for any imperfections in this Q&A, I suppose I should just wade right into this. And there's not going to be a whole lot of questions this time. You know, it's the low 20s. So, kind of at the lower end, which is fine. First question is from Romeo. And Romeo says, if I am correct, the philosophical theory called natural law, with N and L capitalized, natural law, posits that moral principles and rights are inherent in human nature and the natural world and are independent of any laws imposed by society and or religious authorities. Let's see, that's not the question though. Oh, here it is. What is your knowledge and opinion of natural law? Okay, so, I really hadn't studied much natural law. I have had some indirect contacts with the idea. Plus, I did look it up. And according to the source that I inquired into with regard to natural law, it says, natural law is a moral philosophy asserting that humans possess an innate, objective moral order discoverable through reason, rooted in human nature and the structure of reality itself. And it turns out that the most famous, early promoter of this was Aristotle. So, my knowledge and opinion of natural law. Let's delve into this, shall we? First of all, Romeo says, natural law posits that moral principles and rights are inherent in human nature and the natural world. Would they have been inherent in the natural world before humans evolved? Was there still moral principles and rights that existed, say, in the age of dinosaurs? I don't know. The rights itself. I remember there was a guy who joined our Discord server, the Discord server loosely associated with all this. And he was insisting that there are genuine rights that are not just a cultural construct. And people pretty much dogpile them. I kind of participated in this because I just do not see how a right is just innate in the fabric of empirical reality. Like, just set aside morals, like a moral law. Set aside, ideas of right and wrong and so forth. But just rights. That seems like a political construct to me. A right. Does an animal in a jungle have rights? Well, where do you draw? Is there just like this miraculous line that is drawn between humans and non-human animals so that, humans just innately have these rights, but say a stegosaurus tens of millions of years ago, did it have rights? Just built right into the system? I don't think so. So rights, I am skeptical of. If someone can present a good case that everyone has a certain right that is just built into the fabric of empirical reality, then, I'm quite willing to hear the case. I'm open-minded on the subject, but I am skeptical in that I really see rights, like the right to bear arms, or the right to health care, or, the right to just equality even, that it seems like it's artificially just kind of imposed by society or government or whatever. And that if society or government just takes away that support, the right just kind of evaporates. So let's just set rights aside and just deal with morals, because this seems to be mainly what Romeo is curious about. Are morals just natural or artificial? And I would say at the human level, the level of a normie, for example, it's a combination of both. Some morals are like arbitrary and artificial. A big one, a huge one lately, is with regard to pedophilia. Maybe I shouldn't even be saying it. I shouldn't be mentioning it. It's so taboo now. But for most of the human race, when a person goes through puberty, they are biologically an adult. And so for like an older man and a post-pubescent nubile female to have relations, especially after marriage, it was just the way it was. Like Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin in America in the early to mid 1800s. And it was just allowable. Probably some people were grumbling about it, but still, it was accepted. It's like in India, traditionally, they have this idea that once a girl reaches puberty and starts menstruating, every menstruation is practically the same as murdering a baby. It's just a wasted menstruation. So some morals are kind of arbitrary, especially like in the Buddhist monastic code, like Vinaya. A lot of the morals, or just the precepts that a monk undertakes when he is ordained, he's following Vinaya. He's a conscientious monk following Vinaya. A lot of that is just etiquette, not talking with your mouth full of food. It's against the rules, or not growing your hair a certain length. Your hair is not allowed to get more than 2 finger widths or 2 months, whichever comes first. You've got to cut it before then. That's not moral. It's not immoral to eat in the afternoon, for example. And that kind of gets into like regular secular morals too. Jewish morals, for example, like keeping the Sabbath, not even flipping a light switch on the Sabbath day, for example. Or not eating leavening, not eating yeast during Passover week. That would be seen as moral from a Jewish point of view. It was laid down by God, who is the ultimate judge with regard to morals, presumably. But still, from a natural point of view, there's nothing inherently immoral with eating yeast during a certain time period. Whereas it's okay the rest of the time, but during this certain time period of Passover, eating yeast, you are cut off from your people. You are no longer one of God's chosen. So I think a lot of what is considered to be morality is to some degree artificial. And then some of it is just sort of like evolutionarily derived, like real pedophilia, where a person is sexually attracted to prepubescent children. There's like a taboo against that. And there's a taboo against it because it's unnatural. It's like, it's going to cause harm to the child, like physical harm. They're not, their body isn't adjusted for that sort of stuff yet. And it can't produce, they're not going to get pregnant. It's not for reproduction. Ultimately, that is the purpose for reproduction. But there's a lot of neuroticism in the human race about it. Another one is incest, that is considered to be immoral. Why is incest immoral? Because mainly, just setting aside just the sexuality part itself, but incest is it results in severe inbreeding. It's just not healthy. And so that even animals, chimpanzees have like just an instinctive incest taboo. Other animals too, I assume, have just an instinctive incest taboo because it's just not conducive to the health of the species. It's not a good way of promulgating your DNA sequences. So there's some of that is getting into natural law. It's natural morals in a sense, because it's just built into us, instinctive, because it's just good for the species, good for our own DNA sequences. But if you're going to get into something deeper than that, like arguably Buddhist ethics does, then there is a natural law with regard to that. It's like Buddhist ethics is based on human psychology. It's based on karma, which is volition, which is a human mental state. So it's like morals in Buddhism are psychological more than imposed by some deity. It's like the Abrahamic monotheistic religions, right and wrong are determined by God. God decides what's right and wrong. In the Old Testament, if God says you have to massacre an entire town, then it's immoral not to do it. Otherwise, it would be very immoral to do it. Thou shalt not kill and all that. But if God orders you to do it and you don't do it, that's sin. But in Buddhism, it doesn't work that way. The Buddha, he wouldn't say this, but he could tell you to, go do something wrong. And just because you do it, you think the person is a Buddha, let's say. And they're not. They're just some charismatic cult leader. And still, you've done something wrong. And so Buddhist ethics would come about as close to natural law as you're going to find in world religions, as far as I can tell. Other systems would have something similar, maybe. It's not just the arbitrary decree of some king who's called God. So, it's like if you do something and it causes you to be more delusional, to have stronger desires and attachments and suffering, then that is immoral from a Buddhist point of view. If you do something and it causes you to have less delusion and fewer desires and attachments and less suffering, then that's moral. We're talking the big picture here, not just momentarily. You inject heroin, for example, and you just feel this rush of euphoria. That's not moral because you're feeling happy, but you're also more delusional in like less awake, at least with regard to your surroundings. It causes you to become more attached, have stronger desires for the stuff and future and so forth. So, Buddhist ethics, setting aside just the etiquette stuff, like in the rules of monastic discipline, and some of the stuff like the fifth precept against drinking alcohol. Well, let's say you take some cough syrup that has a little bit of alcohol in it, or you accidentally take a sip of some fruit juice that started to ferment in the tropical heat. That happened to me as a monk. That's not necessarily immoral, even though you're breaking one of the 5 precepts. And then, of course, there's like cases of telling lies that are really helpful to people. Like, I watched the movie version of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I don't know how to pronounce French names. I'm not even going to try to pronounce Les Miserables correctly. But, it pretty much starts, the novel and the movie pretty much start with this hardened criminal, Jean Valjean, or Jean Valjean, since we're not pronouncing French words correctly or even trying. He's a hardened criminal, and a kindly-hearted, relatively saintly bishop lets him spend the night in his house. And the hardened criminal steals some silver and takes off with it. So the hardened criminal gets arrested and taken back to the bishop. And the bishop says, oh, no, he didn't steal it. I gave it to him, which was a lie because he didn't really give it to him. I mean, maybe you could sort of say, well, he's kind of stretching the truth a little bit. Maybe in his heart, he gave it to him after he noticed that it was gone, this kind of stuff. But really, he didn't really give it to him. But, I mean, it changed Jean Valjean's life. You know, it was like the first time anyone had ever really been kind to him and forgave him. You know, it was like a Christ-like act that was, you know, conveyed upon him, so to speak. And it changed his life. It was like that moment caused him to really try to become a good person. And he succeeded, relatively speaking, just because this bishop told a lie. And I can give other examples. I mean, if you're going to, you know, like the story, The Third Wise Man, where or The Fourth Wise Man, The Other Wise Man. It's a famous story about one of the wise men who's trying to keep up with the other three that were going to, you know, the magi that were going to offer gifts to the baby Jesus. And there's the scene where King Herod has ordered all the baby boys to be massacred. And this fourth wise man, this magi, is spending the night in this house where there's a woman who has a baby boy, and she's scared because the soldiers are pounding on doors in order to kill the baby boys. And this magi, this wise man, he takes some of the treasure he's going to offer to the baby Jesus. And when the soldier pounds on the door, he just gives him this huge pearl or some such and says, there's no baby boys here. And then, of course, the soldier takes the bribe, says, there's no baby boys in this house. And they just continue on their way. And, you know, the mother is weeping tears of joy and gratitude on the floor because this man just saved her baby. But he told a lie. So, I mean, it's still, from a Buddhist point of view, it would be definitely the lesser of two evils in that case. You know, still telling a lie is immoral because, you know, it kind of disrupts the equilibrium of karmic stability, so to speak. But in a case like that, you know, arguably you could justify, you know, doing something wrong that is less wrong than not doing it. But I'm wandering away from this question of natural law. So we've already kind of established that a lot of morals are just purely artificial. Some of them are kind of getting in towards at least like animal instinct, you know, like taboos against sex with children, taboos against incest, that kind of thing. Even like adultery, you know, there's like some genetic instinctive components to that, you know, of that being considered wrong. So that would be kind of natural law, but I don't think it would be what like Aristotle had in mind. So you have to get into the deeper level of like anything that gets you closer to enlightenment is good. Anything that takes you farther away from enlightenment is bad. And that would be a kind of natural law, especially if you don't think that getting closer or farther away from enlightenment is just another artificial cultural construct, which in Buddhism it is not. I mean, it's pretty empirical, you know, whether or not someone is happy or unhappy, whether they're, you know, delusional, there's going to be all this cultural conditioning that gets in the way of just making a purely objective statement, or as objective of a statement as is possible for a human being to make. I remember I went to see Jordan Peterson give a talk in San Jose, California once. This was back when he was still pretty based, you know, back before he was still like a, He was still like a university professor in Toronto or some such place. You know, he hadn't gotten really famous yet. And he gave this talk where he is trying to come up with some kind of natural law. You know, he's trying to come up with like morals that don't rely on some decree of a capital G God in a scripture somewhere. And he was struggling. I mean, he was coming up with like experiments on white rats, how white rats, laboratory rats, nevertheless naturally have this concept of fair play. You know, you've got a big rat and a little rat that like to play and wrestle. The big rat will let the little rat win sometimes, just because he wants to keep playing with the little rat. And if he wins every time, the little rat's not going to want to play. So he's trying to work out some kind of natural law through this kind of thing, which, I mean, you can say there is like a genetic component, like an instinctual component where certain immoral acts, so-called, are harmful to the species, harmful to your own chances of successfully reproducing your DNA sequences. So that would be sort of like a scientific level natural law. But then you get into Buddhist ethics, where it's just the act itself, the physical act itself is ethically neutral. It's just your mental states, whether they become more like awake and serene, or whether they become more asleep and agitated, just based on how human psychology works. You know, there's a lot of empiricism with like very wise people who are like meditation masters who can see just the subtlest little differences in their mental states. You know, they can see whether this is leading to more clarity or less clarity. They can see in others whether their actions are resulting in more or less clarity. And then they can sort of work out a moral system largely based on that. And I would call that about as close to natural law as you're going to get. But I don't know if it's really a moral principle. It's certainly not moral rights. Even principles. I mean, a principle is kind of like a truth, whereas it would just have to exist as an abstraction. And abstractions, I mean, they have like a conventional truth, but not an ultimate truth. So I would say that there's like at least two different kinds of natural law with regard to moral principles. You know, one is sort of like the animal level, you know, like instinctual taboos against murder, for example. You know, it's like when animals fight, not just humans, but any animals, when they fight, usually it's not to the death. It's until one of them admits defeat and then lets out a yelp or something, which kind of defuses the aggression from the other. It's like the other one wins, the loser goes away, still alive, and that's best for the species. So, I mean, that kind of natural law too, like murder and, you know, like sexual stuff, that kind of stuff can be like an animal level natural law. But then you get into like depth psychology, which sometimes is at variance with animal level natural law, because at the animal level, a certain amount of like greed and lust and aggression and so forth are good for the species. Whereas like from a Buddhist point of view, I mean, you want to get enlightened, you got to kind of detach yourself from the animal stuff, at least as much of the animal stuff as you can. And I'm not sure how well I've addressed this question, but I think I've been going at it for well over 15 minutes. So I think I should probably move on to Romeo's second question. And this one is just a follow-up to the first, and I think I may have already addressed it. He says, where do Buddhism's precepts stand in relation to natural law? And it's like an overlap. There's a certain amount of ancient Indian cultural conditioning. Like, for example, if you're taking 8 precepts and not just 5, or taking 10 precepts and not just 5, you know, one of the 8 precepts is not sleeping on a high or large bed. There's nothing necessarily immoral about sleeping on a high platform. So, I mean, that is sort of maybe indirectly, I mean, it's trying to weaken your attachments to luxury, mainly. Or not handling money is one of the 10 precepts. Or, I mean, just, there's a lot of the precept stuff. Or I already mentioned, like, drinking alcohol. Sometimes, if you drink it to the point of being drunk, it can be arguably leading you away from enlightenment, leading you away from clarity, your ability to see reality. But accidentally taking a sip of some fruit juice that went bad, or taking a spoonful of some medicine that turns out having alcohol in it. To say that that's immoral just because it falls into the precept would be kind of like dogmatic, in my opinion. Just kind of adherence to morality and observances. Silabata paramasa, which is considered to be not a good thing in Buddhism. So Buddhism's precepts have some natural law, and also they've got like ancient Indian ascetic etiquette, at least with regard to the rules of monastic discipline, and just ancient Indian lay etiquette for lay people. Jesus of Nazareth apparently drank wine. He was a Nazarene, but not a Nazarite? Or is it the other way around? It's one of those. I think it's the Nazarites, like Samson. They're not supposed to cut their hair. They're not allowed to eat meat or drink alcohol, that kind of stuff. But I don't think Jesus is one of those. So he drank wine. He miraculously created wine. That's one of his first miracles, I think, was making wine. But it's not necessarily immoral. Not from a natural law point of view. So Buddhism's precepts stand in relation to natural law. It's more the whole Buddhist concept of ethics. Precepts are just kind of like this superficial institution that lends stability to the system, helps to stabilize society, that kind of stuff. And they are conditioned by natural law. They're conditioned by the Buddhist interpretation of how karma works. What brings you closer to enlightenment and which takes you farther away from it. But Buddhism's precepts, it is a combination of, conventional morality, like cultural morality, and also the Buddhist idea of how morals works, how ethics works. But the Buddhist idea of ethics, it would be much closer to natural law than just precepts. And there's somebody at the door, and I hope my woman hears the doorbell ringing, because I don't want to interrupt this video, if you will. But if the doorbell rings again, I may have to holler really loud to get my woman's attention. So, next question is from Siovak and Sipad Zidana. And I'm talking a little quieter just to see if someone's answering the door. Okay, I guess somebody is. Siovak and Sipad Zidana says, are you on the side of a future restoration of a Christian West or restoration of a pagan West? And I really don't think that, I think that's kind of a false dichotomy. I really not wholly behind either one. A restoration of a Christian West, it might be more realistic than trying to bring back classical or Germanic paganism in the West. Classical and Germanic paganism are pretty much dead. That most of the people that are trying to restore it or revive it are essentially LARPing. They're essentially following a kind of replica. It's not this unbroken lineage. A lot of it is just conjecture as to what it was really like and so forth. So, Christianity, on the other hand, it's run its course. It's kind of in the same situation that classical paganism was in the Roman Empire when Christianity was taken over. That to a large degree, like secular scientism has already replaced Christianity, even in the hearts of most Christians, with regard to how to explain reality. So you've got devout Christians who nevertheless defer to science with regard to explaining how the universe works. They might say that God created it in the beginning, but God created it in accordance with these scientific laws and so forth. So, I'm really not on either side. I don't have a dog in this fight because I'm not a Christian or a pagan, really. ideally, I've often considered that I think it would be much nicer from my point of view if Julian the Apostate hadn't died in Persia, and that a kind of revised Neoplatonism had become like the official religion of the Roman Empire and had like somehow outcompeted Christianity. Although that's kind of a pipe dream, I guess. I mean, obviously it didn't happen. But I mean, I would rather see the West, like America especially, go back to being strongly Christian, than just see it just degenerate, just fragment and collapse, maybe being taken over by Islam or something, or worse than Islam would just be like neo-Marxism. So I think that a restoration of a Christian West would be more realistic than a restoration of a pagan West. And I do think that the restoration of a Christian West, it might be worth it, even though I'm not a Christian. I might be willing to take the hit for the sake of saving Western civilization from its imminent decline and fall. I mean, the decline is already in progress, it seems like. I mean, in Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, I think he has the Emperor Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, at least the legal son of Marcus Aurelius, was the person who started the decline. And I mean, the Roman Empire lasted for hundreds of years after that. But I think possibly preferable to either the restoration of a Christian West or the restoration of a pagan West would be something new and better in the future. So it wouldn't be a restoration. It would just be the new establishment of some new spiritual order, possibly deeply conditioned by Buddhism. Although, just being realistic, going with political realities, you couldn't really have the uncompromising pacifism and nonviolence of Buddhism especially in like a world superpower. I guess you just have to renounce the military powers or superpowers or anything like that if people became Buddhist enough. But even Buddhist countries still have armies and so forth. I mean, Burma is arguably the most Buddhist country on the planet, and it's been run by a military dictatorship for decades. It's kind of like the mafia is Catholic. It's kind of that kind of deal. So, yeah, I mean, like I keep saying, I've said this several times on these Q&A videos, that it's hard to say what the next big spiritual system, what the next big paradigm shift is going to be based on. That, I mean, even if science finally comes to the conclusion that the material world is just an outward reflection of our own mental states, or that energy and consciousness are ultimately the same, then, I mean, that in itself could just be a huge Copernican revolution, which would result in a large shift in the way people look at reality. And then you might even have sort of like a kind of Taoist physics or something becomes like the oracle, or like I was saying not too long ago, just virtually omniscient computers like AI might become the new religion. Like Brian Aldiss in some of his science fiction novels, or his science fiction short stories especially, he had this idea that computers will become functionally omniscient, at least omniscient enough to satisfy humans, and that people will just start going to AI as a kind of oracle. And that could start a whole new religious system without even the need of some charismatic sage or spiritual leader or charismatic warlord. So, yeah, that was kind of a trick question because I really am not on neither side. And I think I should just move on to CEO of Action Sipat Zirna's next question, which is as follows. CEO of Action Sipat Zirna says, in Majjhima Nikaya 13, The Buddha claims that all warfare and conflict between individuals has sensuality as their true motivation. Do you agree with this? I didn't believe it at first, but thinking about it makes sense, since we are often not even aware why we do certain things and our own hidden inner motivation. So the question is, do I agree with the 13th sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya that warfare and conflict between individuals always has sensuality as its true motivation? It depends on how you look at it, I guess. Was it Freud that came up with the pleasure principle that said that all of our motivation, everything we do is for the purpose of increasing our pleasure or decreasing our displeasure? So if that's the case, then it would all boil down to that, regardless of what the more superficial reasons are. But if you want to go with, you want to set aside the pleasure principle and just deal with, some nations, like the Roman Empire to some degree, it was just kind of built in, just expansionism was just built into the system for a long time. And it was just what you do, or like crusades, where it's, supposedly a religious war. If there's a religious war, and there have been genuine religious wars, it's not all economics, all desire for money and territory and all that. That's usually a major factor. But still, for the sake of argument, let's say that there really have been religious wars where people are just fighting because our religion is right, their religion is wrong, and they're evil, and we need to defeat them. And that is a major, motivation for people fighting in religious wars anyway. Then how that would fit into the pleasure principle, sensuality, as the sutta has it, or as Siovak and Sipad Ziduna's translation has it, then it becomes more subtle. It's like, to where are you going to draw the line that you just religious fanaticism and intolerance of other people's beliefs? To what degree does that have roots in sensuality? Deep down, you could say it's kind of like their own deep down insecurity about whether their religion is really true. And so they want to just abolish anyone who disagrees with them, just kind of abolish anyone questioning their point of view, so it makes them feel more secure emotionally, this kind of stuff. You can take it down to that level. You can take anything down to that level where it's, they're just doing it for their own satisfaction. And whether you want to call that sensuality or not, I don't know. But just, if you just go with sensuality, like just an overt desire for pleasure, women, more money than the stuff that money can buy, which includes women, then not all warfare and conflict between individuals has that as its true motivation. Some of it's just hate, but then it's like the hate, you could take that down a notch, and they want the satisfaction of seeing their enemies destroyed, which you could say is a kind of sensuality. So if you're going to interpret sensuality as any kind of emotional satisfaction, then yeah, that could be the lowest common denominator. You could just boil it all down to that. But if you're talking about you could let's say economic interests could be put under the category of sensuality, but still some conflict is not necessarily motivated by a desire for pleasure, unless it's just like the emotional satisfaction of getting what you want. So I don't fully agree with it, unless you want to just boil it down to Freud's pleasure principle, or whoever came up with the pleasure principle. Then technically it'd be true, I guess. And then everything we do, not just conflict, but everything else, would have sensuality as its true motivation. So why even just specify warfare and conflict? Just say everything. But if everything isn't motivated by sensuality, then warfare and conflict, in my opinion, are not exclusively motivated by sensuality. And I'm just going to move on to Seal of Action, Sipat Zidana's next question, this is an easy one. I'm not sure why he asked this question. He said, well, first of all, he has this like a screenshot of some post on social media, and the post says, they offered you $80 an hour to clean the cemetery alone, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Y'all taking the job? ? And then Seal of Action Sipat Zidana says, would you take the job, and would be the least amount it would take to convince you? What would be the least amount it would take to convince you? Theoretically, it is 30 minutes away from the nearest building with people living there, and you can't take weapons. Well, first of all, I mean, it would depend on the cemetery, I guess. I mean, if there's like, junkies and gang members hanging out there, then, I mean, I wouldn't take the job regardless of what they were offering. I mean, if it was like obviously physically dangerous to work there just because of, criminals hanging out there that would just pretty obviously, harass me at least, then yeah, I mean, it'd just be a non-starter. But if it's just a cemetery, just a cemetery, then yeah, I mean, why not take the job? $80 an hour? Let's see, if it's $80 an hour and 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., that's 7 hours. So that's $80 per hour at 7 hours per night. And let's say it's a 5-day week. Then that adds up to $145,600 a year. That's a 6-figure income for cleaning a cemetery. And cemeteries in the West, like in America, they're like parks. They're pretty. There's flowers and stuff. It's not bad. But as a monk, I used to live in cemeteries. I would spend the night in cemeteries. As a Buddhist practice. And the cemeteries in Burma, there's like human bones lying around. It's like jungly. There's like not just human bones, but there's like centipedes and scorpions and snakes and that kind of stuff. But I mean, as a monk, I stayed there for free. I just preferred sometimes to stay in a cemetery. Like whenever I went in the vicinity of the town of Kani in northwestern Burma, there was this cemetery. There was a really good cemetery. It had like this big pavilion there where you could stay, and there was like human bones lying around. One time there was like the face part of a skull, just like the front part of a skull just lying face up on the ground at this place. I think it was outside the cemetery, actually. It was like on the road, maybe 100 yards away. And it's like, that doesn't bother me. I'm not particularly afraid of ghosts. So, yeah, I'd take the job easily. I mean, I don't like working nights. It's like, what is it? Working until 5 a.m. I mean, that would kind of suck. I mean, it's kind of late. Second shift I prefer, but I mean, going to work at 10 p.m. is kind of pushing it. But for $145,000 a year, obviously, I mean, it would be a heck of a lot more than I'm making now. So I'm not sure why Seal of Action Sipat Zidana asked me this question. I mean, personally, I'd take the job for half as much. Half that pay would still be, I mean, you're just cleaning a cemetery. I mean, cemeteries don't tend to be all that dirty, especially in the West. That look like golf courses or parks. What are you going to do? Just picking up wilted flowers, picking up hankies that people have thrown to the ground. But again, I mean, if you've got like gang members and just like homeless, crazy drug addicts and so forth, just like haunting the place, that would be worse than ghosts. But if it's 30 minutes away from the nearest building, then it'd be like a 30-minute drive to work. So there's that too. But still, for $80 an hour, yeah, that would be a bargain. I'd go for it easily. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from PSA. And PSA says, when you were a monk, which of the 227 precepts did you find most difficult to observe and why? So by specifying 227 precepts, he's referring to the Patimokkha rules. I mean, there's most of the rules of monastic discipline are not in the 227 rules of the Patimokkha. Most people don't know this. Even some teachers of Buddhism don't know this, that I've calculated probably there are between like 2,000 and 3,000 rules of monastic discipline altogether, most of which lie beyond the limits of the Patimokkha. But let's just keep it down to the Patimokkha, the 227 rules. The most difficult to observe of those rules. When I was a young monk, young, dumb, and full of precious bodily fluids, then it would be like Sanghadisesa number 1 was difficult, which is not having orgasms on purpose. Because when you're young and just come from like an oversexed family anyway, it's like the hormones reach this like a breaking point where you're just, I mean, you can just be like wanting to just cry and howl like a dog, beat your head against the wall. Fortunately for me, about every 2 weeks, I just automatically have like a pornographic dream. And when I was in my early 40s and stopped having those, I sincerely miss them. But yeah, that was like the biggest challenge. The sorest trial and ordeal for me was just being celibate, even to the point of not spanking the puppy. That was very difficult. There are other rules, like minor rules that aren't in the Patimokkha that, I mean, it's just easy to break them. But of the Patimokkha rules, I mean, that was like the sorest trial. And if you break that rule, you've got to do penance for 6 days and 6 nights, go through this very inconvenient reinstatement ceremony with at least 20 monks present, and it's just a pain in the neck. So yeah, that was the most difficult for me. So let's just move on to PSA's next question. He says, you've mentioned briefly here and there that you have experience at Zen monasteries, but I wonder if you could elaborate in more detail how the whole thing was, and was it Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, or Chinese Zen? Well, when I was looking for a monastery at which to be ordained, at first I was leaning towards Zen. You know, I just had more exposure to Zen Buddhism. I like the idea of, you know, the mysterious men dressed in black, talking in riddles and hitting each other with sticks. You know, it appealed to me. Then I tried 2 monasteries. It's like, I mean, in the place where I was living at the time, Aberdeen, Washington, or at least Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Aberdeen, Washington, home of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, all that. And I mean, there's no Buddhist monasteries around there. There was some rumor of a Buddhist monastery in the San Juan Islands, but I think it was like, it wasn't Theravada. I don't think it was Zen. It was like, you know, Nichiren or something. So I went to a Zen priory in Portland, Oregon, and told him I wanted to be ordained as a monk. And he presented me with this. It was like a directory of Buddhist organizations in America. And I just wrote down the name and address of any place that wasn't obviously not a monastery. You know, some of it, I didn't know what it was, but it might be a monastery. So I wrote down like 20 names and addresses and just sent out this letter, you know, and stating my intention of becoming a monk. And it turns out most of the places weren't even monasteries. I got 2 letters back from actual monasteries. One was the name in the directory was Tongpulu Sayap Dao. Even the word Sayata was spelled wrong. I had no idea what a Tongpulu Sayap Dao was. But it might have been a monastery, so I sent a letter. And then I also got a letter from Shasta Abbey in Northern California, which is a Zen place. So I checked out both places. And Shasta Abbey, I think it started off in a more Japanese tradition, but then it was becoming kind of more more Chinese in its orientation. The abbot or abbess was this large English woman. I don't remember her name. I met her once. And they were sort of reforming a little bit. At first it was allowable for like the ordained priests and nuns to get married, and then they kind of stopped that so that the Roshi at the priory in Portland had kind of distanced himself from Shasta Abbey. He was ordained there. He and his wife were ordained there. But then when they were forbidding marriage, he said, well, we were already committed to each other. So they just kind of went their own way. But I went to Shasta Abbey for like an introductory retreat, just kind of test the waters. And I mean, it was nothing like men dressed in black standing around talking in riddles and hitting each other with sticks. Nobody hit anybody with sticks. You know, it was kind of feminized. I mean, you had a female abbot, an abbess running the place, a nun running the place, and lots of bowing and chanting, lots of ceremonies. I mean, you'd bow to a door before going through the doorway. You know, you'd bow to the room upon entering the room. Lots and lots of chanting. And I just wasn't attracted to that. Also, there was a lot of Pure Land stuff that was kind of conflated with Zen there. And I've never had any use for Pure Land Buddhism. So, and then also they ran a store. You know, they're selling like candles and Buddha statues and little gongs and incense and that kind of stuff. And you'd have monks and nuns like getting out of their gray Zen pajamas and putting on regular layman's clothing and driving to town in a car, you know, to buy groceries for the monastery, this kind of stuff. So, I mean, that really was a far cry from what you read about Zen monasteries in books. You know, the men dressed in black, talking in riddles, hitting each other with sticks. So then I went to Tampulu Sayapdao, or Tampulu Kaba'e Monastery in Boulder Creek, California. And it was like 4 Burmese monks, only, 2 of whom spoke fluent English. The abbot spoke almost no English at all. And they're just living a quiet life, you know, just they handled money, but not ostentatiously. You know, I didn't see them handling money at the time. You know, they didn't drive cars. You know, they didn't put on layman's clothing. They weren't running a store. You know, they were just being monks. And so comparing the Burmese Theravada place with this kind of westernized, Japanese, maybe slightly Chinese Zen place, I mean, it was just, the difference was very stark. And it was fairly clear to me that the Theravada place was coming closer to what the Buddha actually taught. So, I guess that's fairly elaborate with regard to my details, how the whole thing was. So I think I'm just going to move on to PSA's third question. He says, you're approaching 200 Q&As. That's amazing. Are you planning a big party or special event for that episode? People have been kind of pestering me a little bit to have another live stream for episode 200. I did a live stream for episode 100. And I'm game, I guess. It's just, the thing is, I'm not very good at live streams. Not because I'm not good at being spontaneous. I mean, these are pre-recorded, but all done in one take. You know, there's not a lot of jump cuts. So, yeah, I may do a live stream. But that's about it. The thing is with the live streams, I just don't have enough experience with it because I have only done it like 2 or 3 times. So that it's hard to tell if I'm even live. Like I mentioned, the very first time I did a live stream Q&A, I think it was a Q&A. I mean, it looked like I wasn't even online. And I just walked out of the room to try and get my woman to help me figure out what was going on. She said, you're on. You just left the room. So I came back and continued the Q&A. So, or whatever it was, continued the video. But yeah, it's like probably a live stream would be about the most you can hope for in that regard. And I'm moving on to the next question. This is from Cyrus Frame, one of the few people that asks questions on Rumble. And Cyrus Frame says, could it be said that volition is the will to carve the uncarved block? Well, golly. I mean, it could be said, I guess. But, I mean, I really don't see it that way so much. I mean, in a way, you could say that volition is the will to carve the uncarved block. But let's say that you've got the uncarved block of stone, which, as I keep saying, contains within it, in potential virtual form, every possible statue. So the forms, those virtual forms, would be perceptions. And the movement of those forms, not just the movement, but whatever kind of continued pattern is keeping that statue, in a state of coherence as it moves, it goes through its actions of brushing its teeth or whatever, then that would be volition. So, volition is karma. And it's interesting. There was a book, it's still out there, I'm sure, the Buddhist Bible, which was mainly oriented towards Mahayana Buddhism. But it had some interesting translations, and it translated karma as habit energy. And that's a good translation. I mean, most people don't think of karma as habit energy. But, I mean, you think about it, that is a good translation. It's habit energy. And so the volition or the habit energy, the karma, is what is keeping that virtual, like moving statue, that image contained within the block of marble, what is keeping it coherent as essentially what is identified as an individual that continues to exist over time. It's like the habitual pattern that keeps it, in like a recognizable pattern for perception to perceive, and at the same time is, through time. So it's volition is just like the temporal aspect of perception, but also there's like the stability aspect of keeping that perception, that even though the perception is changing, keeping it the same enough that you keep perceiving it as the same thing. It's not just completely changing from one moment to the next into something unrecognizable. So volition or karma, habit energy, also has that function of a kind of, it's a momentum. It's the momentum of your mental states. It's the momentum of your perceptions, so to speak. Just as perception is sort of like the form of your volitions. It's like two aspects of the same thing, perception and volition. Perception is like the form aspect. Volition is the function, form and function, so to speak. Noun and verb. So I hope I answered that question at least somewhat satisfactorily. I hope he doesn't just spit and turn off the video after hearing that answer. Because I'm moving on to the next one from Cyrus Frame. Is mindfulness the awareness of perceptions? It seems clear when noting, looking, hearing, etc., but not so clear when noting thinking. Yeah, it's hard to note thinking. That's one thing about noting. It apparently, just going with scientism, it apparently uses the same centers of your brain as thinking. That noting of the thinking and the thinking, they use the same areas of your brain, apparently, so that you can't do both at the same time. So if you're thinking and you note the thinking, it stops the thought. As a general, like if you're doing Mahasi style noting. On the other hand, you get music stuck in your mind. You can note it till you're blue in the face, and sometimes that music won't stop. It's like it's a different part of your brain so that like the noting doesn't preempt it. But I wouldn't say that mindfulness is the awareness of perceptions. Mindfulness is like the simplification and minimization of perceptions. If you're being mindful, so you hear the barking dog, you're sitting there meditating, a dog starts barking outside the window. Then if you're being mindful, you're being aware, you're like noting the auditory perception or just the auditory sensation of hearing. You're aware of hearing, and you're you're like aware of like the textures of the sound, when it starts, when it stops, what it sounds like, and so forth. It's just that you don't have like a running commentary about whose dog is that, and they shouldn't have their dog barking outside my window. They should train their dog better, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, you're thinking about what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow. So mindfulness is reducing perception. And when you get to the perfection of mindfulness, fourth jhana, which is considered to be perfect mindfulness, you're not thinking anything. It's just like you're as close as you can get to just bare sensation, or not bare sensation, but bare consciousness, pure consciousness with almost no perceptual content at all. So mindfulness is reduction of perception, not so much awareness of it. I mean, just by having bare awareness, non-judgmental, choiceless awareness, like Krishnamurti talks about, that reduces the perceptions because you don't have like this running commentary. Your thoughts aren't hooking up in sequence. Let's see. Mindfulness, the awareness of perceptions. Yeah, in a sense, it is the awareness of perceptions, but that's not how you would define it really, because it's like awareness of bare perception, the simplest form of perception that you can manage. Until finally you get to the perfection of mindfulness, you've got virtually no perceptions at all because you're in fourth jhana. So mindfulness is reducing perception so that you don't have all this thinking and labeling and commentary and stuff going on. At first, at a beginning level of mindfulness, you're still labeling. You get better at mindfulness. You do away with the labeling. You just direct your attention at the thing and observe it without having to slap a word onto it. And then when you get even better, you're so aware, like your mindfulness is like observing the surface of a still pool. And if a thought even starts to arise, then you notice the ripples immediately. And it's like the noting of that just causes the ripples to just fade back out again. And you're just sitting there in a state of silence. So mindfulness is the simplification of perception, let's say, through like, what would be like intense awareness. In Burma, like the warning signs, they don't say caution or warning or aktung, they say sati, or in Burmese, thati, which, is like attention. So mindfulness is like attention. Okay, let's just move on to Cyrus Frame's third question. He says, I'm assuming it's a he. You are not the mind. The mind is just what is playing on the screen of awareness. Do you think this is true? Well, you are not the mind, yeah. Except, if there is... there are certain ways where you could identify the ego with the mind. Obviously the ego is itself a projection of mind. So the ego would be mind, and that's kind of what you are because you don't really exist. So the illusion of you is just pure mind. So set that aside. Let's just say there is no mind, or there is no you, no self, anatta. So then it would be correct. You are not the mind. The mind is just what is playing on the screen of awareness. Well, not really. The mind is the screen of awareness, and mental states might be what is playing on the screen of awareness, like in Abhidhamma philosophy, or just the five khandha theory, whatever. You've got mind or consciousness is different from mental states. In Abhidhamma, it's chitta is consciousness, cetasika is mental states, which would include perceptions and volitions, feelings, that kind of stuff. So the mind, more correctly, would be consciousness itself. And so what is playing on the screen of consciousness would be mental states. So it's kind of true, somewhat true. And I'm just going to See, make sure that I at least kind of did some kind of justice to that question. Yeah, I guess so. I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Christian. And I'm not sure if this is a legit question that was expecting an answer. This is from a person called Christian. Whether that's their real name or not, I don't know. But they were talking, they left a comment under the previous Q&A about how ridiculous it is that there is even an idea of enlightenment. And I pointed out, it isn't meaningless. It can be like an enigma or paradox, but at least from a Buddhist point of view, enlightenment is not meaningless. So Christian responded with, if you search for enlightenment, aren't you bound to attachment? Also, what does it mean to be enlightened? How do you know if you haven't achieved it? Well, that's 3 questions, isn't it? I wasn't expecting this. I just cut and paste. I just thought it was one question. Oh, how naive I was. Okay. Christian, first question. If you search for enlightenment, are you bound to attachment? At first, yeah. Because it's like skillful means. I've mentioned this before. I've written essays on this where it's like if you commit yourself to seeking enlightenment, to living the holy life, it's like you reduce your desires and attachments pretty much down to 1. It's like your desire for sex, drugs, and rock and roll and pizza and ice cream and all that. You have kind of renounced those attachments, but still you have this one attachment for enlightenment. But so long as you still have that one attachment, it's still an obstacle to enlightenment. So what happens is you try as hard as you can and you fail because you still have this one obstacle, which is your desire for enlightenment. So that at some point, through insight or despair or whatever it is, you eventually just let go of that last attachment. Boom, there you are. So, it's common to other religious systems also, just this moment of surrender, of just giving up. It's a big deal in some schools of Christianity also. But you're not bound to attachment at the moment of enlightenment. It's like you have to let go of that last attachment in order for enlightenment to occur. But still, this attachment for enlightenment serves as kind of like a gimmick or a skillful means to help you like get rid of these other attachments. It's like all your eggs are in one basket and then you just let go of that last basket of eggs, so to speak, and there you are. So, Christian's second question. Also, what does it mean to be enlightened? Well, I suppose I could just start off with just some of the standard Buddhist explanations. It is the end of suffering, end of dukkha, or it is the end of greed, hate, and delusion. Or if you prefer, it is the end of attraction, aversion, and semi-conscious stupidity. Or, what I would be inclined to say it means to be enlightened is block of marble. We're going back to the block of marble again. You got this uncarved block, which contains within it all possible statues. And delusion and samsara is believing that these virtual conditional statues inside the block of marble are real. At least some of them. You're only aware of a finite number of them. So enlightenment is, you practice Dhamma, Dharma, you practice meditation so that, I've explained this many times. I think Christian might be a new viewer, though. So let's forget the block of marble for a minute. You've got consciousness is water. Mental states are waves. Most people, like unenlightened people, are completely locked in to the level of form of waves. They have no concept of water, really. It's just waves. I like this wave. I don't like that wave. This wave is good. That wave is bad, etc., etc. So by practicing the holy life, practicing morality, and practicing meditation, you calm the water. Until you get good enough at meditation that, or just good enough at calming the water by any means, that the waves are no longer distracting you. You can't really identify with the waves because they're not there anymore. Or at least it becomes so subtle that you're able, through insight, to go beyond the mere level of forms into just water. And then, so that would be like a kind of insight. And when you're practicing jhana in Theravada Buddhism, that's called temporary liberation right there. It's like a temporary enlightenment when you're sitting there not thinking anything. So you can't be distracted by samsaric forms because you have temporarily just like subdued the samsaric forms. So you're liberated from samsaric forms temporarily while you're in this jhanic state. But the trick is, and Zen Buddhism talks about this more than Theravada does, as far as I know, you've got what is called Zen in the marketplace. Once you have been able to see water instead of being completely distracted by waves, then the waves can come back. And that's, according to Zen Buddhism, that's 1,000 times better than like enlightenment, like sitting cross-legged on a cushion, is when you're like in the marketplace and you're making noise moving around, everyone around you is making noise moving around, you still are focused, or like not necessarily focused, but I mean you're like existing at the level of water, and all these waves are just irrelevant. They're still there. It reminds me of the old Zen saying that I've repeated several times. It's like the meditation hall can be resounding with the shouts of the master, and blows from his stick can be falling like rain, but still the master abides in stillness and silence. Because he's got Zen in the marketplace. He's not distracted by the forms. He's at the level of water. He's at the level of uncarved block instead of all these possible like conditional virtual statues. So that would be what enlightenment is you're existing at the level of consciousness and not at the level of mental states. And I explain it over and over again, and some people will ask, kind of the same question over and over again because they don't get it. Because it takes some kind of like multidimensional thinking to grasp it. It's like dealing with two different levels of reality simultaneously, and some people just can't deal with that. Even like intellectual people. Like brilliant physicists and so forth. Is for some people, they're just so completely locked into an intellectual, perceptual-based understanding of reality that they just can't separate themselves from that. So, Christian's third question: how do you know if you haven't achieved enlightenment? Well, I mean, if you're still wallowing in samsara, if you're still experiencing suffering, if you're still unhappy sometimes, that would be a good indication of it. If you're just raging at some old lady and kicking her dog, then that's a good sign that you're not enlightened. But I mean, it's tricky, and it's paradoxical and enigmatic. Enlightenment is because of that waves coming back deal. The waves can come back and you can still be enlightened, even though it may look to another person, wow, look at all that stormy sea going on over there. So that's the tricky part. And some Mahayana Buddhists, especially some Hindus probably too, say that, I mean, everyone is ultimately enlightened because the water is always there. It's just you're distracted by the waves. But the water is always there, just like the essence of enlightenment is always there. I assume that's largely what Mahayana Buddhists are calling Buddha nature. I mean, how far away are you from ultimate reality? I mean, it's right here. We're soaking in it. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This also might be just like a rhetorical question. This is from Jeffrey. He says, I like to meditate with cigars. Probably not correct, but it's not really me, so why not? Well, I mean, you can meditate with cigars. Ajahn Mun, who is like the stereotypical example of an arahant in Thai Buddhism. Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mun, maybe Ajahn Mahabua would be like the three big, just sages of modern, like 20th century Thai Buddhism. And Ajahn Mun was a chain smoker. I assume he smoked a lot of village cigars. I don't know if they had like Western style cigarettes in Siam 100 years ago. And he is believed to have been fully enlightened, despite the fact that, I mean, if you smoke tobacco regularly, that officially technically makes you a drug addict. But that's just kind of a weird thing, isn't it? You've got an enlightened drug addict. But I mean, if someone else is addicted to some substance, then that's maybe a ray of hope. Well, Ajahn Mun was addicted to nicotine, apparently. Maybe because he was enlightened, he just kind of transcended it. That was just part of the stormy sea, or the sea, the waves, and he just wasn't identified with that anymore. Even though his body may still have been addicted to nicotine. So, I mean, if you can smoke a cigar mindfully, I mean, it couldn't be like just a little ritual, sort of like the Japanese tea ceremony. You know, there's the ritual. You're cutting the end of the cigar and you're mindfully holding it, feeling the texture and smelling the aromas, and mindfully lighting it and watching. You're mindfully puffing. You know, you're mindful of the muscles in your mouth as you're puffing on it, and watching the little flames shooting up as you take the puffs and all that. Mindfully inhaling, mindfully exhaling, mindfully feeling the effects of the nicotine in your system. I mean, if you're doing that, that's still legit meditation. If you're smoking the cigar mindfully. I mean, technically you could do like mindfulness of breathing, breathing in, breathing out while taking puffs of the cigar, I guess. But anything you do mindfully is meditation. I mean, you can be having sex mindfully, and that's still, it's like tantra, still a kind of meditation. It may not be the ideal kind of meditation, but still, I mean, you inject some meditation into just about any activity. Taking a dump, for example. So, yeah, why not? It's not really you anyway, is it? Because there is no self. If you are anything, you'd be more just the sea of consciousness rather than all these distracting waves, so to speak. But then again, Buddhists aren't supposed to reify the absolute, even though the Abhidhamma scholars did big time. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Zenithoid. We've been going for an hour and 17 minutes. This next question is from Zenithoid. You've said that Buddhism in its masculine form is the negation of delusion, and in its feminine form it is the negation of suffering. Are delusion and suffering not ultimately the same thing? Well, I have said that, like, the more head-oriented and thus stereotypically more masculine approach to Dhamma is a concern with, freeing oneself from delusion. Whereas the more heart-oriented and stereotypically more feminine approach to Dharma is liberating oneself from suffering. But ultimately, if you have reduced suffering to zero, that's the same as reducing delusion to zero. I don't think delusion and suffering are necessarily the same thing. They're certainly not defined as synonyms in the texts, but you don't suffer without delusion. If you don't have any delusion, you don't have any suffering either. So in order to eliminate suffering, you still have to eliminate delusion. It's just that the end result may be perceived as different, but either way, you have to eliminate delusion, because that's unenlightenment. So delusion and suffering, I mean, they're ultimately the same thing, and ultimately they're just like imaginary statues in the block of marble. I mean, they're not defined as synonyms, but without delusion, you don't suffer. And so in order to stop suffering, you have to cut the link. Generally, I mean, it's like desire. Desire is the cause of all suffering. Delusion is the cause of all desire. So in order to stop experiencing desire, you have to have such intense mindfulness that that you're not deluded anymore. So, I mean, that's how I would explain it. Ultimately, it's just meaningless because ultimately you can't explain reality in words. Ultimately, there are no different things. That dividing the world into a multiplicity is like an artificial construct. It's a projection by the mind. It is delusion, ultimately. But you can't have suffering without desire, and you can't have desire without delusion. So by eliminating delusion, you eliminate all three. And you can't eliminate suffering without eliminating the first two anyway. So it's all about delusion, it seems to me. Even if that is not like the deliberate focus of one's practice, that's the way it works out. So we head-oriented people are a little deeper in that kind of understanding, maybe. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Dhamma River. And Dhamma River asks a kind of technical Dhamma question here. He says, I wonder if you could please read a very short sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya before answering this question. It's the Kassapa Samyutta, Sutta 8, Exhortation 3. It ends with this sentence, and that is my question. Could you please explain what this sentence means? And so, here's the concluding sentence, or concluding paragraph of this sutta, which I did read. I read Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. He says, if Kassapa, one speaking rightly, could say, those leading the holy life have been ruined by the ruination of those who lead the holy life. Those leading the holy life have been vanquished by the vanquishing of those who lead the holy life. It is just thus that one could rightly say this. Okay, so I did read the sutta, as I already said, and it doesn't strike me as a particularly early one. There is some anachronism in this sutta. And I mean, the whole purpose of the sutta is talking about how monks used to be like conscientious, ascetic forest dwellers dedicated to meditation. And now, like the most high profile, most respected monks are just the famous ones that are good at talking. So, I mean, that in itself is something that you would expect later on in Buddhism than during the Buddha's own lifetime when he's still leading the Sangha. And also there's an anachronism here in this sentence, or this paragraph. He says, I mean, the Buddha asks Kassapa, let's just do a little synopsis of this sutta. The Buddha asks Mahakassapa, who is his senior disciple, if he wants to give a sermon to the monks. And then Mahakassapa says, the monks don't even listen anymore. They're not respectful anymore. And then the Buddha says, quote, just so, Kassapa, in the past, the elder bhikkhus were forest dwellers and spoke in praise of forest dwelling. They were alms food eaters and spoke in praise of eating alms food. They were rag robe wearers and spoke in praise of wearing rag robes. They were triple robe users and spoke in praise of using the triple robe. They were of few wishes and spoke in praise of fewness of wishes. They were content and spoke in praise of contentment. They were secluded and spoke in praise of solitude. They were aloof from society and spoke in praise of aloofness from society. They were energetic and spoke in praise of arousing energy. And then he talks about how nowadays, they're just the ones that get the most donations are like the most respected. But you look at this part here is especially, they were triple robe users and spoke in praise of using the triple robe. That's in the Patimokkha rules. It later on, it came to be like this optional practice. But that's built right into the Buddhist monastic code that all monks are supposed to be triple robe wearers. You don't keep more than 3 robes. It's a Nissaggiya Pacittiya offense to keep an extra robe for more than 10 days. If you keep an extra robe, a 4th robe, which is just a rectangle of cloth, for more than 10 days, then you have committed a Nissaggiya Pacittiya offense. You have to relinquish the extra robe, and then you have to make confession for it. So this sutta apparently arose at a time when that Patimokkha rule had already become kind of obsolete through just monks not following it. And nowadays, there are very few monks that follow that rule. Like Ajahn Tanisro in his famous book on the Buddhist monastic code, he just follows the Thai loopholes of getting around this rule. And he just says, if you call it something besides a robe, then it's not a robe. You just designate it as accessory cloth, parikarachola. Just call it parikarachola. It's not a robe. Even though you're wearing it as a robe, it looks like a robe, which is just nonsense. It's just playing games, trying to avoid following a rule. And by the time this sutta was composed, this had already happened, which is kind of unlikely that during the Buddha's own time, that monks would already have abandoned this Patimokkha rule. So I would say that this sutta arose later on. I mean, probably not much later on, because it is in the Tipitaka. It is in the Sutta Pitaka. But I would guess that it is kind of an anachronistic, made-up kind of sutta. So, I mean, the whole spiel here is that in the early days of the Sangha, I mean, the Buddha is actually supposed to be saying this, so it's like, this is kind of weird. But the Buddha is saying in the early days of the Sangha, the monks were, dedicated ascetic meditators, lived a life of simplicity. And so they got the most respect. And so that new converts to the Sangha would look at these monks that were getting the most respect and emulate them. But later on in the Sangha, the monks that are the most respected are the ones that are getting the most donations. They're the best talkers, this kind of thing. And so new monks entering the Sangha, they look at them as being the most respected, and so they emulate them. So we get to this statement in question. Those leading the holy life have been ruined by the ruination of those who lead the holy life. Those leading the holy life have been vanquished by the vanquishing of those who lead the holy life. So essentially what it means, although it's kind of awkwardly worded, is that when monks start getting corrupt and then they become the leaders of the Sangha and they're the most respected monks, then the new monks are just following in their footsteps and becoming corrupt also. I mean, that's essentially what it means. So those leading the holy life now have been ruined by the ruination of those who led the holy life previously, because they're emulating them. That's how I interpret it anyway. And I mentioned in a recent Q&A that I did meet the Burmese equivalent to the Sangha Raja of Thailand. He's the Burmese equivalent of the Sangha Raja is the Sangha Mahanayaka Sayadaw, the great leader of the Sangha. And he handled money, and he would praise the donating of money to monks, to lay people when he'd give Dhamma talks. He'd encourage them to donate money to monks. And he was like the leader of the Sangha in Burma anyway. I mean, technically, he's pretty much just kind of a bureaucrat. Probably most Burmese Buddhists wouldn't even know who he was. But still. And that's kind of the way it goes. It's just corruption in religion is largely a matter of human nature, largely a matter of just cultural drift. The system adapts to the culture and to human nature more than human nature is going to adapt to this very exalted ideal. So you've got two kinds of religion. You've got really wise, exalted religions that inevitably get corrupted because most of their followers aren't wise people. Or you've got just religions that are kind of foolish and easy to follow right off the bat, so that the followers don't need to corrupt it because it's already foolish and easy to follow. And I won't name any names. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Ethiopian Fake Tig. An Ethiopian Fake Tig says, around Q&A 22 or something, I'm glad that people are still watching those old ones. But I just interrupted myself. Ethiopian Fake Tig says, around Q&A 22 or something, you spoke about what it would be like to attain first jhana and how it's like the muscles in the next spasming, since one is in a state of focus and such. Can you perhaps speak on the 3 other jhanas in detail? Well, I really don't think that I said that you're spasming when you get first jhana. I think what he's referring to is, I mean, I don't have much use for the whole 4 jhana system because I think it has been corrupted over time. Another sign of corruption is the interpretation of the 4 jhanas. Personally, I think originally the 4 jhanas were just the 4 stages of meditation. So that first jhana, when you're still thinking, it's like beginning elementary meditation. If you're doing it correctly, that would qualify as first jhana. But somewhere along the lines, due to monks not understanding jhana very well, maybe because they were more interested in formulating philosophies than actually meditating, they have it worked out that all 4 jhanas, even first jhana where you're still thinking, are superhuman mental states, udri manusa dhamma. Superhuman mental states. So in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, when it says that right concentration is the 4 jhanas, it's now worked out that right concentration is a superhuman mental state, which it seems kind of implausible to me. Anyways, what I was saying, I don't remember exactly what I said in Q&A 22, but there is something called piti, or I think in Hinduism it's called shakti, where sometimes if you're breaking new ground in your meditation, you're getting into a deeper level of meditation than you're used to, your whole body can just start twitching. Because it's like you're in this subtler state that requires less mental energy, maybe, so that you've got this excess mental energy that has to expend itself somehow. And so it just expends itself in just like twitching and jerking of your muscles. That has happened to me a few times. There's a story of Ram Dass when he gets to visit his guru Maharaji in the evening when everyone else is gone, which was a rare occasion. Maharaji would just stay by himself, maybe like an attendant or something there. But Ram Dass got to visit him, and Maharaji was apparently pretending to be asleep. And so Ram Dass started meditating just because he wanted to meditate in Maharaji's presence. And it was almost immediately he got into this really deep state where he is just his teeth are chattering and he's just twitching and jerking all over the place. And then Maharaji would just kind of open his eyes and ask him some mundane question. How much does your friend so-and-so make? To kind of bring him back down because he just wasn't ready for it yet. So that's essentially what I was talking about, was this piti or shakti or whatever you want to call it, that when you get into a deeper meditative state than you're used to, then your muscles can start to twitch and that kind of thing. And it's not indicative of first jhana necessarily. So let's see here. Can you perhaps speak on the 3 other jhanas in detail? Well, all 4 jhanas, if you want to know what the jhanas are, you look in the suttas and you will find that almost every time the jhanas are mentioned or described in the suttas, it's the exact same block of words. It's just this stereotyped block of words that's just inserted into suttas when the jhanas are to be described. And unfortunately, it's not a good enough description that the meaning of jhana is uncontroversial. So, the first jhana, you're still thinking, you're still capable of thought, and you're still feeling physical and mental pleasure and pain. Then in the second jhana, you stop thinking. You're still feeling mental and physical pleasure and pain, but you're no longer thinking in your words are no longer, your thoughts are no longer hooking up in sequence. A thought may just flash into your mind, but then it just disappears again, and you're not thinking. So, third jhana is, if I remember correctly, hope I don't embarrass myself here, you're not thinking, you got rid of that when you got into second jhana, and you're no longer feeling mental pleasure and pain. You still feel physical pleasure and pain. So it's like your mindfulness is getting deeper so that your mind is no longer feeling like happiness and unhappiness, even though your body is still capable of feeling pleasure and pain, still not thinking. Then when you get into fourth jhana, which according to the original 4 stages, the original description of the jhanas in plural, then that's supposedly the highest meditative state you can get to. I mean, originally it's probably the way it was, in which case you're no longer thinking, your mindfulness is purified, and you're no longer experiencing mental or physical pleasure and pain. It's just a state of perfected equanimity. And I mean, there's some people that consider proof of fourth jhana to be, you almost stop breathing and your heart rate slows down like that of a hibernating squirrel. And Shoko Asahara of Japan was actually using like air chambers to measure the breath rate of people and showing that they were in this state where they had almost stopped breathing. They required almost no oxygen, and using that as proof that his system was producing fourth jhana. But to me, it sounds more like a deep hypnotic trance. And my father's second wife, not my mother, was capable of going into extremely deep hypnotic trances, despite the fact that she was an alcoholic and not moral at all. So it wasn't really jhana, probably. But she would go into very deep hypnotic states where her breath and her heart rate would become almost invisible. Almost no detectable pulse or breath rate. So I'm guessing that some of this, I've been saying for years that a lot of what is considered to be jhana is really like a deep hypnotic trance that probably isn't genuine samma samadhi. But just going with the standard 4 jhana theory, 4 jhana system. First jhana, you're still thinking, still feeling mental and physical pleasure and pain. Second jhana, not thinking anymore, still feeling mental and physical pleasure and pain. Third jhana, your mindfulness is getting deeper. Not thinking, not feeling mental pleasure and pain, but still feeling physical pleasure and pain, or still capable of feeling it. And finally, fourth jhana is just like vast expanse of voidness. But you're in a higher state of consciousness. You're more awake. Your mindfulness is purified. It's just like super consciousness, which again makes it seem unlikely that you would become completely oblivious to your surroundings like a hibernating squirrel. Although some of those Hindu swamis, they can appear to be completely oblivious, like maybe a hibernating squirrel, but then after they come out of it, they can repeat conversations that were going on in their presence by the scientists that were examining their brain waves or something while they were in that state. So it may seem like you're oblivious to your surroundings like a hibernating squirrel, but that's not necessarily the case if in fact you were not oblivious. And I'm just going to move on to Ethiopian Fake Tig's next question. He says, you once said in Jainism, their fully enlightened beings know everything all the time, and their enlightenment is different. Can you speak a little about other forms of enlightenment and their powers in other religions? Well, golly. I haven't really studied this in detail in various religions. Kind of ironically, the definition of enlightenment that I understand the best would be in Buddhism and Roman Catholicism, and before I read St. John of the Cross, I was oblivious to the idea that in Roman Catholicism, there even is like the stage of perfection. Because of course, in Christianity, it's like nobody is worthy. Everyone is imperfect. You only get into heaven through the grace of God. And here's St. John of the Cross saying that you can become perfect in this very life. Well, with regard to Jainism, I've never really studied up like a Jain text describing what it's like to be fully enlightened Jain, although Mahavira and other Tirthankaras, who are sort of like the Jain equivalent to Buddhas, they supposedly were fully omniscient all the time, as opposed to the Buddha, who is selectively omniscient. He could know anything he wanted to know, but he wasn't experiencing infinite knowledge at all times. At least not infinite objective knowledge. So, and that was kind of mocked in the Buddhist texts. With regard to Hindu enlightenment, that's a tough one. I mean, I know a little bit about Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji up there. You know how Ram Dass would say that the better you got to know him, the more you realized there really was nobody there. That he was just like a mirror reflecting your own karma back at you. And he did not act like the stereotypical saint. He didn't even act like fellow Hindu Ramana Maharshi. He was like a rascal. He'd be hitting people and throwing fruit at them and cracking jokes. That kind of stuff. But with regard to St. John of the Cross and Roman Catholicism, I mean, he says that, when you master high contemplation, which would be the higher jhanas, you're no longer thinking when you're practicing Catholic contemplation. Meditation is when you're still thinking. That would be like first jhana. And then, it's sort of like repeating the Lord's Prayer or, visualizing scenes from the life of Christ, that kind of thing in Christianity. But when you get into contemplation, just any thought that arises, you dismiss it until you mortify your own self-will so that you no longer have self-will, which is kind of interesting considering that a Buddhist arahant also supposedly no longer has self-will because will is volition, volition is karma, and an arahant is not creating any karma. So he's not creating any real volition. So the Catholic arahant and the Theravada Buddhist arahant, both of them have just stopped generating volitions. But from St. John of the Cross's point of view, his Christian explanation is that because you no longer have any self-will, you are purely motivated by the will of God. You're just like this puppet of God. And that is being God through participation, according to him. And what he says is authoritative in Roman Catholicism. He is the mystical doctor of the Catholic Church. Whatever he says about mysticism is official dogma in the Roman Catholic Church. So, according to the Roman Catholic Church, even though they don't advertise it, you can become God through participation, just like this divine puppet of God through mortifying your own will. In Buddhism, it's harder to explain because there is no God, there is no will of God for an arahant to be a puppet of. And so in Abhidhamma, they have to invent some new kind of pseudo-volition called Kriya Chitta, functional consciousness, that will allow an arahant to appear to have volitions, even though he's not generating any karma. But most religious systems don't even have a form of enlightenment, even in theory. They might have the few outlying enlightened advocates or followers of that religion who just become enlightened in spite of the system as much as because of it. Like an enlightened Sufi, I don't know what their definition of enlightenment would be like. Just like Quranic Islam apparently doesn't have a concept of enlightenment. According to the Bible, the Bible really doesn't. The closest being to enlightenment in the Christian Bible, of course, would be Jesus, but he's still. He never laughs, but he cries. He gets upset sometimes. How long am I going to have to deal with you people? This kind of stuff. So, from the Buddhist point of view, he's not really behaving like a fully enlightened being. So, dear God, please take this cup from my hands. He'd get depressed and upset sometimes. So, gosh, even Mahayana Buddhism, their concepts of enlightenment, I'm sure that they're all over the map, just depending on the school of Mahayana Buddhism. But it is interesting to me that two systems that are so different from each other, Theravada Buddhism in India and Roman Catholic Christianity in 16th century Spain, both apparently independently through different angles, different interpretations, had come up to a very similar understanding of what enlightenment is like, which may mean that it's based on personal experience of people in Theravada Buddhism and people in Roman Catholicism, just kind of going through a cultural filter. But I guess I should just move on to the next question. Move on to Ethiopian Fake Tig's third question. He says, I saw a video of you as a bhikkhu talking about the tree that smells. Do you perhaps have more videos like that, since the video, weirdly enough, created a very calm and serene emotion for me? It could be the way you took each material carefully and meticulously and how calm you were, or the message you were sending. But if there are more vids, would you post them? Yeah, the sermon on the stinkwood tree. There was a guy I met, an American man, came to visit me in January of 2011 when I was still living at Wenbo Wildlife Refuge Monastery. And he kind of followed me going for alms round a few times. And I would take my bowl out of the bag and put it back into the bag on the outskirts of the village under this tree that I was told, I mean, it's called like the stinkwood tree or the rotten wood tree, where and when it was one of the only big trees in the area. I mean, the rest of them have been chopped down, but the wood stinks. You can't use it for lumber because the lumber stinks. Even if you burn it as firewood, the smoke stinks. And they say that you can't even use it to like bake bricks because somehow the stink or something permeates the brick or something. So it was just like this useless tree. And because it was useless, it got to grow into this patriarch of a tree. And it reminds me of the Zhuangzi, what is it? The Zhuangzi is the Chinese Taoist text, the second most famous Taoist text, where similarly, there's this huge tree that nobody bothers to chop down because it's just totally worthless. And so in the Zhuangzi, or however the hell you pronounce that, it's just like the sage is just so unobtrusive. Nobody pays any attention to him. And so he can live his life in peace and reach the full fruition of his potential. You know, you don't want to be useful to normies because then they're going to be pestering you all the time. I mean, look at Jesus. He could heal the sick. There's like people just pestering him to heal their grandma of her rheumatism. Anyways, getting back to the question though. Yeah, I mean, just it's all already posted. All of those old videos of me being a monk have already been uploaded onto YouTube. So just go to my videos and just go to the oldest ones. It may be that you can even like click on oldest first, and all of my old monk videos when I'm still in Burma should come up. You know, even like you go to my channel and you know, the highlighted video is me going for alms round in what was it, Lamie village. So there are, I don't remember how many videos. Not very many. It's in single digits, but still, all of the old videos of me being a monk still in Burma are already up on YouTube. So just go to the oldest ones on my channel. You know, just go to videos and maybe you have a filter of oldest first, maybe, and they should be right up at the top of the list. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cole. And Cole says, what do you know about the Pali Canon teachings that pertain to the jhanic attainments and their correlated rebirth in the various deva realms? Well, the jhanic attainments, I kind of already went over the 4 jhanas to a previous question, so I won't rehash that. I mean, technically, according to the Pali text, you don't get superhuman mental states like psychic powers without jhana. You can become enlightened without jhana and become a so-called dry-visioned arahant who just becomes enlightened through like vipassana, insight, mindfulness. But if you want to be able to read minds and know your past lives and all that, you have to get into the higher jhanas. Those would be jhanic attainments, I suppose. But I guess what Cole is mainly asking about is the correlated rebirth in the various deva realms. So, I mean, I didn't do my research. I've never really believed this stuff very much. It's in the texts, but I mean, I never really took such an intense interest in it as to bother to memorize it. But in the 31 planes of existence, you've got four levels of Brahma realms corresponding to the 4 jhanas. And I think there are like 3 levels for each jhana. So there's 3 Brahma realms corresponding to each jhana. One is when you just are getting into the jhana, but haven't mastered it. One is when you're like have intermediate mastery, and one is when you've fully mastered it. And I think Mahabrahma and his entire retinue are still only at the level of first jhana, if I remember correctly. I mean, don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. There's like the retinue of Brahma, and then there's like the counselors of Brahma, and then there's Mahabrahma himself. All of that would be like the three Brahma realms corresponding to first jhana. And a lot of this strikes me as just religious propaganda cooked up by the Buddhists. I mean, I'm one of the few Buddhists or anyone who's been a monk who can actually talk like this because, of course, if you're still a monk and you're kind of a missionary, you don't want to be pointing out, sort of naughty bits in Buddhism. But for some perverse reason, I've never really hesitated all that much. But you've got Brahma, Mahabrahma, who literally is like the personification of ultimate reality for Vedic Hindus, who, from the Buddhist point of view, I mean, he corresponds to just like this mediocre level of heaven. He's like he's on one of the lowest Brahma realms with bunches of other heaven realms higher than him. So it's like the Buddhists are saying, look at this. These Brahmins are claiming Brahma is the highest when we Buddhists have got into such higher mental states, higher meditative states, that we can get into these realms way above Mahabrahma, even though Mahabrahma is literally the personification of ultimate reality. So a lot of this stuff, I mean, it's like propaganda. I mean, you shouldn't take it too seriously necessarily. If you're just faith-oriented, you want to believe it all, like a medieval Roman Catholic in Europe or a modern Burmese villager, you just want to believe all of it, it's all gospel truth, then, I mean, I might not be the best person for you to be watching on YouTube, for starters. I mean, just having this stainless steel faith and believing all of it, I mean, it can serve some people. It's like all those medieval Catholic saints, all those Burmese sages, a lot of the earlier Thai ones, I mean, they did it just through this unquestioning faith, which inspired them. When you can't have any doubt at all that it's all true, then you're less lukewarm about it all. But getting back to Cole's first question here, yeah, it's like each of the 4 jhanas has 3 corresponding Brahma realms, with, I'm pretty sure, Mahabrahma being corresponding to first jhana down at the bottom. And I mean, that's pretty much all there is to say about it. I mean, I don't remember the official names of these Brahma realms. I'm fairly skeptical of their objective empirical existence. Not that there aren't 4 jhana realms or 4 jhanas. I mean, you can divide jhanas up into 4. In Abhidhamma, they divide it up into 5. The formless realms add new jhanas. They're sort of subsidiary to 4th jhana. They're considered to be sort of like additions to 4th jhana because they'd already settled on 4 jhanas in the suttas. Oh, let's see. What else is there to say about this? Let's see. Let's just read the question again. What do you know about the Pali Canon teachings that pertain to the jhanic attainments? and their correlated rebirth in the various Deva realms. It wouldn't be Deva realms, it would be Brahma realms. That's how you get into Brahma realms, is through jhana. That's pretty much the only way to get into Brahma realms, is to have gotten some jhana in this life. Not even necessarily mastered it. That would be like you master first jhana. That would get you up into the level of Mahabrahma, I think, if I remember correctly. Not just his retinue and his counselors, but the big guy himself. So, yeah, and then there's like the formless jhana realms, like the formless Brahma realms, supposedly correlate to the somewhat anachronistic formless jhanas. So, in my opinion, the whole thing is sort of cooked up after the Buddha's time. I would be surprised if the Buddha really taught this stuff. I won't just categorically deny it, but I would be mildly surprised if the Buddha really did teach, the details of the 31 planes of existence, and how, you master this level of jhana, it's going to get you into that particular Brahma realm, and the 4 formless jhanas will get you into the formless Brahma realms, even though, like, mention of the formless realms goes all the way back, at least historically or like legendarily, to right after the Buddha became enlightened. Like the Buddha, right after his enlightenment, he's using the Deva eye, Deva Chakut, clairvoyance, to see who he should teach. And first he's thinking of, his first 2 teachers, his first 2 meditation teachers. And then through, the divine eye, he sees that they're up in formless Brahma realms, so that he can't access them there and teach them because they don't have any sense organs. So it's complicated. I mean, the evolution, everything is impermanent. Everything changes over time. I mean, all you have to do is just look at the early history of Christianity, and you see that Christianity was mutating like a virus during its first century of existence. And it's similar in Buddhism. Like Theravada Buddhism, it mutated like a virus for its first, at least 100 years. That was the first schisms occurred about 100 years after the time of the Buddha's passing away. And still, Theravada Buddhism was mutating. Like Abhidhamma didn't even exist yet until after the first schisms. So it's kind of an academic question. Cole's first question here is somewhat academic or dogmatic, depending on how you want to look at it. Because if you want to believe that it's all true, then it's in the text right there. But you want to know the actual truth of the matter, you might be a little more skeptical. So I'm just going to move on to Cole's second question. Does the mind need to actively immerse in jhana at the time of death for that type of rebirth to occur according to the teachings? And I used to think about that also. It's like just having the ability to enter jhana, is that good enough? Or do you have to actually die in jhana in order for you to wind up in a Brahma realm? And one of the best indicators I know of for the first option would be the Gautika Sutta, the very strange and interesting Gautika Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, where Gautika gets jhana and loses it, and gets it and loses it, and gets it and loses it, until finally, in a state of semi-desperation, maybe full-on desperation, he's thinking, if I die with jhana, I'm guaranteed of a Brahma realm. But if I die when I don't have jhana, like I haven't mastered it yet, or I'm not able to access it, then there's no guarantees where I'm going to wind up. I could wind up in hell in a lower realm or something. And so he self-deleted, cutting his own throat with his razor after he got jhana the next time. And he wound up becoming enlightened. So, I assume he was not in a jhanic state when he's lying on his cot with the straight razor in his hand. So presumably, just based on that bit of evidence, according to Theravada Buddhist tradition, you just have to be in a state where you can access jhana. You don't necessarily have to be absorbed in a jhanic state at the moment of death in order to get into these states. But you have to have a mental state that is open to jhana and accessible to it in order to get into these Brahma realms after you die, technically speaking. Although at least a grain of skepticism is maybe prudent in this case, unless you really are relying on full-on stainless steel faith in the whole system, in which case, again, you're probably watching the wrong videos. So let's just go on to Cole's third question, which is, are these teachings from the Buddha or commentarial? And that is a false dichotomy, because there's this middle ground of after the lifetime of the Buddha, but before the commentaries, where the suttas are actually mutating like a virus, or just the philosophy of Buddhism is mutating like a virus. Systematizers are kind of locking stuff down into like the description of the 4 jhanas, which is just a verbatim block of information that is just inserted into suttas. The 12 Nidana theory of Paticca Samuppada would be another case of just the sort of a hard to understand teaching of the Buddha just gets crystallized into this block of words that just gets inserted into sutta after sutta. So I don't think that these teachings necessarily came from the Buddha. I mean, maybe he may have kind of touched on it a little bit, and then it just got elaborated into 31 planes of existence and the 3 levels of Brahma realms for each jhana and all this. But it's probably after the time of the Buddha, but before Buddhaghosa. So hasn't devolved into Buddhaghosism yet. But it's in the suttas. It's in the Pali Suttas. But still, just because something is in the Pali Suttas does not mean that the Buddha himself necessarily taught it or endorsed it. So I'm guessing, this idea arose. I mean, I'm unfamiliar with the other Hinayana schools and their opinions on the matter. It may be during the first 100 years of virus-like mutation of Buddhist philosophy that this arose, so that it could still be in the core texts of the suttas. Just because something is in the core text, all that really means is that in all likelihood, it was already set as scripture or official doctrine before the schism started and the Second Council. Or maybe, I guess the schism started after the Second Council. So approximately 100 years after the time of the Buddha. Okay, I guess I answered that. And I'm moving on to the next question, which is the last question. In fact, this question was asked just shortly before I started this video. So this is from Yoshibui. And Yoshibui says, according to my research, memory isn't stored in a fixed location inside the brain. Rather, it is distributed throughout the brain via a web of interconnections between brain cells that are constantly reshaped by experience. These interconnections can, of course, be disconnected. Do you see a parallel between how memory, as described above, is created and how karma is created? Well, when I read this, the first thing that came to my mind was a quote from Bertrand Russell that I wrote in my little notebook that I used to keep when I was a monk. I mean, this notebook has been in several Burmese caves. And when I would read something interesting in a book that I didn't own, I would write it down in this notebook. And so this is from Human Knowledge, Its Scope and Limits by Bertrand Russell. And so Bertrand Russell says, when a physiologist examines a brain, he does not see thoughts. Therefore, the brain is one thing and the mind which thinks is another. The fallacy in this argument consists in supposing that a man can see matter. Not even the ablest physiologist can perform this feat. His percept, when he looks at a brain, is an event in his own mind and has only a causal connection with the brain that he fancies he is seeing. when in a powerful telescope he sees a tiny luminous dot and interprets it as a vast nebula existing a million years ago, he realizes that what he sees is different from what he infers. The difference from the case of a brain looked at through a microscope is only one of degree. There is exactly the same need of inference by means of the laws of physics from the visual datum to its physical cause, and just as no one supposes that the nebula has any close resemblance to a luminous dot, so no one should suppose that the brain has any close resemblance to what the physiologist sees. Amen. Although Bertrand Russell was still kind of a materialist. I mean, he was still an advocate of scientism to some degree, especially in his later years. So, I mean, it's kind of a materialistic interpretation of how memory works. It's kind of the point that I'm making here. And it's not necessarily an accurate or reliable description of how memory actually works. I mean, you cannot prove that there is a physical brain that even exists. Read George Berkeley, he'll tell you. He'll explain it all. But I really do not see much of a parallel between how memory as described above is created and how karma is created. I mean, karma is just the momentum of your mental states. It's not some sort of holographic pattern kind of a thing like memory is supposed to be, going with this interpretation of neurophysiology and psychology and so forth. So I would say that karma is much simpler. You know, it's just, ultimately karma is very complicated because there's so much of it, and it's, you can have complicated momentum, but still, as I've said, karma is really, it's like you've got the virtual images contained in the block of marble that actually can move. So it's the perception would correspond to the form of the image, and volition, which is karma, corresponds to the movement, and at the same time the kind of like momentum and stability, the stability of the perception to still be essentially appear to be the same thing over time, even though it's not. You know, it's sort of the movement and stability of the pattern at the same time. And so it seems like it's a very different principle from a kind of holographic memory in a presumed physical brain. And who knows? I mean, the way memory works, even in science, may be changed over time through, radical reinterpretations of basic assumptions. Yeah, so I mean, if you see karma as a kind of momentum, it's not a matter of patterns being stored in like a static object. I mean, it's got patterns, maybe complicated patterns, sort of like the complicated patterns allegedly forming a memory in the brain. But it just seems like it's comparing apples to oranges, or comparing apples to like, I don't know, wooden barrels or something. It's just very different. I mean, I don't think the principle is really a parallel kind of a principle. You can find resemblances and you can find differences, but I don't think it's really a good analogy for how karma works. It's habit energy rather than, and you could say that memory is also habit energy, but still, I mean, it doesn't have much to do with the like theoretical way in which it is stored in a brain. It's just the subjective experience of it. Habit energy. So karma and memory could both be called habit energy. And I mean, memory would be part of your karma. It's part of the stabilizing pattern that keeps your perceptions from just becoming something completely different, so that everything is unrecognizable from one moment to the next. But describing karma is very difficult, and the Buddha himself says in the text that trying to work out all the complexities of it can lead to insanity. So, as a way of avoiding insanity in myself and in others, I think I'm just going to call it good or good enough for now, and apologize to Yoshibui and everybody else that may be dissatisfied with my answers, but I did the best I could, I guess. And so, like and subscribe if you have not done so already, or even if you don't like it. I mean, you can still subscribe, you just hate watch. I guess some people do it. And look at my URL links below, which includes my new book, Memoirs from Myanmar, which is much more autobiographical than my other books. And if you have any questions you think I can answer, I mean, you probably get some idea of the kind of stuff I can answer from this Q&A, although I also have some more familiarity with like Western philosophy and so forth. Just feel free to ask, and no more than 3 questions per person per episode, please. And for crying out loud, be happy.